Welcome to today's webcast. This call is being recorded. And now to begin the program, I'd like to introduce Rich Seeley.
Hello, and welcome to the webcast, Ransomware, How to Limit Downtime When Infected, sponsored by MForScale. I'm Rich Seeley with Virtualization and Cloud Review. Thank you all for joining us today. Before we begin, let me take care of a couple housekeeping details. Please feel free to type your questions in the Ask a Question box on the console at any time during the presentation. We will address as many of your questions as we can during the live event today. The entire webcast is being recorded and will be archived for future viewing. We will send you an email when the replay is available in approximately 24 to 48 hours. You can access the replay using the same link you used today. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's event. Up a little later is Carla Federigo. Carla has more than 12 years marketing and data protection experience. Carla is a popular presenter and has in-depth experience with DRaaS, business continuity, and ransomware mitigation, serving as MForScale principal spokesperson at industry events around the globe. And starting us off today is George Crump, president and founder of Storage Switzerland. With 25 years of experience designing storage and DR solutions for data centers across the U.S., he has seen the birth of such technologies as RAID, NAS, and SAN. Prior to founding Storage Switzerland, he was CTO of one of the nation's largest storage integrators, where he was in charge of technology testing, integration, and product selection. George, take it away.
Thanks very much, Rich. I appreciate that. So let's get right into the meat of the presentation here. I like to start by level setting and making sure everybody's on the same page. So if it's a little basic, I apologize, but I want to start with what is ransomware? Why is it all of a sudden on the top of everybody's mind? Well, first of all, let's talk about how it works. Essentially, it's a malware product that alters files by encrypting them. It gains access to those files, to gain access back to those files after they've been encrypted. You either recover the files from a backup or you pay a ransom, right? And unfortunately, or fortunately if you're the ransomware author, it's a rapidly growing business, and a lot of people select that pay the ransom option. And, it's projected to be over $1 billion in 2016. Now, what's interesting about ransomware is sort of how it gets into the organization and also how you can protect yourself from that happening. So we're going to talk about some of those things as we go through the presentation today. But of course, the big thing is, why do organizations pay in the first place, right? And there's a couple of reasons that we see. First of all, one reason is the data was never backed up, or the backups were too old, right? If the best known good copy of your data is 2 or 3 days old, you may decide that it's worth it to pay the ransom. Secondly, and this is probably more common, is that the recovery attempt failed. In other words, there was no testing, there was never any validation that these backups were working. The third thing is the time it takes to recover is more costly than actually paying the ransom, meaning that to some extent you could say that the process is broken, that if it takes you 2 days to recover data and you need that data back right away, and it only, and I'm using air quotes here, only costs $1,000 or $2,000 to release the ransom, then maybe you decide that's a good option. By the way, what we tend to see is that most ransom demands range wildly, anywhere from a few $100s to $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. What I tend to see is that most of the times a ransom is priced enough that it's painful to pay it, but not ridiculous, right? If somebody had your data held hostage and they said it would be, $4 million to get it decrypted, everybody would say no. But because it's maybe $4,000 or $40,000, that becomes a little bit more of a business discussion that you can have, right? So they're not, the guys that do this are not dumb. The other big one that we see, even organizations that are doing a good job here, is the backup software or the backup storage was itself a victim of the attack. And so a couple of things there. Many backup software solutions are based on the Windows platform or run on a Windows platform. Windows is the prime target. Not necessarily anything wrong with Windows, it's just it's a population thing, right? You're going to go to where to the biggest market. And so that makes it vulnerable to attack. We've also seen specific attacks on specific backup applications where the ransomware will specifically go after either different applications, the backup databases, things like that, or specific branded snapshots, for example. So if you're counting on snapshots to help you, that's a pretty risky move. There's multiple ransomware strains that will attack a Microsoft VSS type of snapshot, for example, and multiple ones that will attack like a NetApp snapshot as an example. So that's why we see people sort of paying the ransom. The other thing to kind of talk about here is the whole Wannacry attack in May of 2017, which really brought the whole ransomware conversation to a new level. If you look at what happened there, the actual payments were relatively low. And part of the reason for that was the attack became well known very quickly. Here's the way I would gauge this. If I, George Crump, am getting called by CBS News, which I was, to talk about ransomware, you know that this has gotten pretty big pretty fast, right? And so it was a very interesting few days. And so, but what was kind of funny is its popularity, or it's how quickly it became known, actually worked against it. Most ransomware works because it very quietly attacks an organization or two. The organization very quietly pays the ransom, and life goes on, right? So it was a unique situation. Also, and I don't want to offend the Wannacry guys, but it was a relatively weak version of ransomware. It used a specific exploit to get into the system, and if your servers were patched, then that was a way that you could protect yourself from it. And so it was a unique way, and one of the things to talk about is how does ransomware get into the environment. So there are these sort of server exploits, but most IT professionals are going to do their very best to protect the environment. The one thing you really can't protect against is the user, right? And to give you an example of that, there was a study done by the University of Illinois where they dropped, I think it was about 300 USB sticks in various parking lots around the campus. And they were going to study how many people would pick them up and insert them in, because everybody kind of thought it was urban legend that people would find a USB stick and stick it in a drive. Over 50%, it was actually 58% of the people picked up the USB stick and put it in their laptop, which was connected to the network. 68% of those did no additional steps to see if the USB stick had any kind of virus or anything like that on it. So that gives you an example of just how vulnerable you could be to an attack. You could do all the right things and still be in danger, so to speak. So let's also talk about sort of why Wannacry failed. Most ransomware attacks you don't ever hear about. The best ones, really, you don't hear about, at least best from the perspective of the bad actor that wrote it. Since the middle of May, I've had at least 14 calls from different organizations that have subsequently been attacked by something other than Wannacry. So why does that happen? Well, first of all, nobody wants to admit that they had to pay a ransom, and they don't, right? They don't ever admit that they did. Usually when people call me, it's sort of very quiet. Like I said before, the typical payments are relatively low. We typically see ranges from $10,000 to $20,000. And often they don't actually exploit the operating system, right? Like I said, they exploit the organization's weakest link, the user, and that study that we were talking about with the University of Illinois is a really good example of that. And if you look at some of the other means, typically is links within emails, things like that. Some of these are not the old days where you used to get an email from a guy from Uganda that had $10 million worth of gold and just needed $1,000 from you to get access to it, right? With poor grammar and all that kind of. These look very professional. They look like they're coming from large shippers or online retailers, and they're telling you that your order's been placed or your order got lost or something like that would generate a click. And so they're very good compared to what they used to be. So now the good news is that there's a lot of tools available to be able to protect yourself from a ransomware attack. And I've kind of broke that into 4 steps. So let's talk sort of about the 4 steps to ransomware recovery. The first step is, despite everything I've said, we still want to do what we can from a prevention standpoint, right? Obviously, the best recovery ever is the one you don't have to do because you were prepared, right? So that means making sure your servers and firewalls, all that kind of stuff are all patched. The challenge I have with servers, in fact, I mentioned this in the interview we did with CBS News, but there was some criticism going around against IT professionals. It was sort of like, well, all you had to do was patch your servers. Well, if you've ever worked in a data center, which I'm assuming most of you on the phone have, there are servers that are, beyond your control that you just can't patch, right? But they're connected to your network because they interface with something. The victim, the primary victim of the attack, or at least the initial victim of the attack, the National Health System in England, was a great example of that, right? They had medical devices that were, they basically what they owned was the medical device. That medical device came with a server that the IT folks there weren't allowed to touch. Many of those servers driving those devices had pretty old versions of Windows on them. So that's hard to do. Plus, if you're in an environment that has a few hundred servers, the physical process of updating every single server all the time, staying on top of that, is daunting, to say the least. So yes, we want you to keep updated on all this stuff, but hey, reality is it's going to be very hard to do. And the third thing, of course, is we want to train users to recognize suspicious emails or nefarious websites, to not put USB sticks that they found in the parking lot, which still amazes me, into their laptops, at least not a laptop they're going to connect to the system. So all those sort of things are really critical. But the reality is that at some point, we believe that most organizations are going to be hit, that all this prevention will eventually fail, and then you need to be ready. And so the second step is to talk about is protection. Like I said, they will get through, so protection is a requirement. You should treat ransomware as if it were a disaster, right, or an impending disaster. So if the same way you prepare for a hurricane or a tornado or a flood or an earthquake, whatever it might be, is the same process here. There's some changes, though. The number one thing we want people to do is increase the backup frequency. For us, the best practice is a 30-minute or less protection frequency. So if it's backup, that means we want you backing up every 30 minutes. And so that becomes something to look for in software, because I know that when I say, hey, back up every 30 minutes, there's more to that than just running a backup, right? You've got to have an application that can process and be very efficient in doing backups on a routine basis. The other thing is the data should be safely stored both on-premise and off-site. So you want to make sure you've got those both ends covered. Again, this is, to some extent, this is disaster recovery 101, but it just, ransomware really highlights a lot of it. So safely stored on-premise means that the system you're storing it on is not vulnerable to attack, right? So it has some specific provisions to make sure it can't be attacked. A really good one is to make sure that the storage area for the on-premise storage is not Windows-based, or if it is Windows-based, that it's read-only or it's self-encrypted so that nothing else can get to it, but controlled by the backup application. There's a couple of things you could do there. And then the next thing is to make sure the data is off-site, a further hop away, if you will. Again, same reasons that in a very bad case, you can cover it. I think one of the things to be very cognizant of is that ransomware will continue to get more and more sophisticated. When you have an industry that's making the type of money that it is right now, or maybe I shouldn't say stealing the type of money that it is right now, you're going to see continued investment to make these things more intelligent, more harmful, and to specifically go after the countermeasures that you may be developing. So just be aware of that. The other big one is protect all the servers in your environment at this level, this higher frequency of backup, and making sure the data is securely stored. And the reason we say that is that most people, at least up until ransomware, were very, very focused on their Oracle and Microsoft SQL and Exchange servers. You know, the servers that if are down for 30 seconds, people are screaming at you, right? They tend to overlook or sidestep things like file servers and different things like that. And so those tend to not get the same level of protection. But those are the things that most people are paying ransom. They're paying ransom to unlock Windows file servers and things like that. Now, I'm not saying that Microsoft SQL isn't a victim of this either, but we see a lot of payments going to free up file server type of data. Now, the other thing to think about here is all of this might require new technology. What we're asking for is not impossible, but legacy or traditional backup applications may not be able to cover all of those capabilities. So that's just another thing to kind of think about as you go through this process. So the third step is detection. And users yelling at you is not detection. By the way, users yelling at you might be detection when it's Exchange or Microsoft SQL or something like that, because somebody's in and will know. If you wait for the users to identify that encryption is occurring, especially on a file server, it might take a while. And the longer it takes, the more files get encrypted. We see some of these ransomware applications be able to encrypt hundreds of thousands of files in just a few minutes, right? So the speed here is really critical. So what you're looking for is you can use the way ransomware works against it. So to encrypt data, a few things must happen. Number one, a file has to be opened. Number two, that file has to be changed. In the case of encryption, you're kind of jumbling the bits. And then number three, that file has to be saved back, right? And so essentially what you're looking for is a file that's been modified. So what you want are solutions either integrated into the backup system or a separate software application that can identify high change rate on a per user basis. That becomes really important to realize that encryption or you're under attack. And if you're doing it at the frequency that we're talking about, you can prevent a big chunk of the attack just by having this sort of alerting system. Now, obviously, the fourth step is at some point you are going to have to recover data, right? And so the number one objective is that the recovery process has to be faster and easier than actually paying the ransom, right? So if it's going to take you 8 hours to recover all your files, now, and remember, the problem here is that we could be talking about hundreds of thousands of files, right? And one of the challenges for most backup applications is multiple single file recoveries. So in this case, 100,000 single file recoveries is a weak point for both the backup application and the operating system. Recovering one file is a piece of cake. Recovering 100,000 files one at a time could be very, very painful. The operating system also may not handle this well. Imagine an operating system having to deal with 100,000 different file write operations, right? So just that process, it's more than, I guess what I'm trying to get across there, if you have 500 gigs of data to recover, it's more than just the time it takes to copy a straight 500 gig stream of data, right? It's probably 300,000 or 400,000 files that make up that data set, and so that's a lot of I/O operations that are occurring, and it can take 3 to 4 times as long as you might think. And so making sure you've got a way to recover that quickly becomes very important. And so what we find is in the result of a moderate-sized attack, and certainly a worst-case attack, is that your best bet might be just instantiating the full server. Instead of having to recover 100,000 or 200,000 or 1 million files, it might be faster to just recover the entire server. Now, again, that might require new technology that allows you to recover directly from the backup source, things like that. So that's something to think about. Now, so let's talk about what this rapid full recovery looks like. Like I said, the first thing we want is, the term I kind of like lately is the boot from backup technology, that the backup appliance and the backup system have the ability to be the host and the source of data for the backup software. Also, that detection becomes really important because you know which version of the backup you should recover from. You really want to have a choice of both an on-premises recovery as well as in the cloud, because depending on the level of infection, your on-prem backup solution or backup copy could also be corrupted. Now, I think that there's things that backup software vendors can do to make that more difficult, but you've got to kind of be prepared for the worst. My thinking here is, I don't know what ransomware is going to look like in 2018, but it's going to be more sophisticated than what we have today in 2017. And so that's the real critical part, and the key element for the cloud is that it could be very valuable in the event of a total data center hit. And we have seen entire data centers essentially corrupted, literally where people are pulling out network cables to try to save certain servers. So those become the key things, but what you're really looking for here is a boot from backup type of technology that can do that either on premises or in the cloud. And so those really become the sort of the key components. Now, the good news through all of this is everything we just described is also going to cover you in all the other type of disasters we typically deal with, right? Backing things up more frequently and making sure that you can boot or reinstantiate an entire server very, very rapidly. All of those play perfectly into any other type of disaster recovery that we might be working on, right? So that could be, for example, a server or an application failure, right? Certainly going to be much more common than even a ransomware hit, and certainly more common than a tornado or a flood or a fire, the thought of losing a server or an application. And so the ability to do all these different things from those type of instances becomes extremely valuable. One of my big things is a storage system failure, right? A storage system failure is as close to a disaster as you can get without actually losing the data center, because in most cases your storage system will drive multiple applications. In a virtual environment, it might drive hundreds of virtual machines, right? So the impact of losing a storage system is pretty significant. So again, the ability to boot from the backup device to run either on-prem or in the cloud becomes very, very critical in this situation. And then, of course, the kind of the classic, if you will, disaster recovery challenge of you lose the entire data center or have the threat to the entire data center because of a a fire, flood, earthquake, hurricane, whatever the natural disaster of your choice is. Everything we've just spoken about, especially when you wrinkle in the cloud, also protects you from those types of situations. So those are really the key elements. I wanted to make it pretty quick, but the key things to think about is to make sure you're doing what you can to prevent. Make sure you have the ability to detect a attack as quickly as possible. I can't emphasize enough the importance of increasing backup frequency. Look for technology that can increase the backup frequency. That can be done with change block incremental backups, lots of different technology there to do that. And then also make sure that you have the ability to recover, and then by recovery we're talking about the ability to recover really the entire server without actually having to move data. So that's that boot from backup, boot from recovery device or backup device type of technology. So I know that Carla, you guys have a lot here, and obviously with disaster recovery as a service or DRaaS, it brings an added element of protection. So why don't you explain to the folks how you guys would fold into this type of a strategy?
Yep, will do. Thanks, George. Really great information that you shared, and thank you everyone for being here and for your time today. A couple of really great points that George brought up. The time that it takes to recover from ransomware is more costly than the ransom itself. He mentioned that early on, saying that the process itself is broken. So here we're going to kind of move and talk about a better process, a process that will actually work, that's not broken. And that's sort of where disaster recovery as a service comes in, or DRaaS. And at a really high level, DRaaS essentially just replicates and protects your entire environment. So it lets you really quickly fail over your systems, not just your files and folders. So that ensures uptime and availability when something goes wrong, like in one of these ransomware attacks. So in getting into some of the details, our mission here at MForScale is simply to eradicate downtime and data loss. And with that, and with DRaaS, essentially there are lots of different ways to define a DRaaS solution. There are various ways to back up and recover critical systems and data. Organizations have different security and compliance requirements. And there are lots of different levels of flexibility in backup targets and recovery options. So there are lots of things at play there. What I want to share is how MForScale DRaaS works and what are the important items to take into consideration when you're selecting a DRaaS provider or solution. Now, I do want to mention as well, you don't have to take my word for it because Gartner named MForScale a leader in the 2017 DRaaS Magic Quadrant, and that was released last week. So all the information that I'm going to share with you has been vetted and validated by the experts. So now here at MForScale, we offer a 15-minute failover guarantee. And that's really critical because nobody in the industry currently offers that. And what's also interesting about our specific approach to ransomware is a proactive warning system. And most DRaaS solutions out there will maybe say, we can't detect the problem, we can only remediate it. But we can do both. And we're going to take a look at that in just a minute. And that was something really critical that, that George was discussing as well, because ransomware works very quietly in the background, like you mentioned. It's working its way into your systems, and then usually companies simply very quietly pay the ransom as well. So we'll talk about that more in just one moment. But we want to look specifically at the difference between backup and DRaaS, just to be sure we're on the same page with this here, and then we'll move into the details with the DRaaS solution. So when you're dealing with those ransomware threats, we already discussed, we know that time's your worst enemy. So the faster that you can detect it, the more time you have to take action and restore your databases, your mission-critical apps, and simple backup procedures take significantly longer than a modern DRAS solution. So look at the top of the screen here is where we're at with a backup solution. The best case scenario is going to be about 4 to 5 hours. And part of the reason is when it comes to restoring applications and production databases from a backup, it requires planning and coordination. You have to find that clean point from which to restore. You have to get hardware to recover. You have to set up the machine, recover the data, test for viability. If it's not viable, then you start all over again before actually restoring to production. But along the bottom, look at a DRAS solution here. If you have a DRAS system, you can simultaneously cloud boot multiple versions of the same machine and determine a safe version to recover. And then you can boot either to the cloud, a virtual environment, or recover to production hardware. So if you look at the total downtime along the bottom of the screen here, it's 1 to 2 minutes. So that's saving a ton of time and money and energy because of the simplicity of these steps. And with the MForScale DRAS solution, it also includes built-in failover orchestration, and that lets you create predetermined failover plans. And then that can be scheduled to boot simultaneously or in a specific order. And we'll look at that in a second as well. But rather than just talk through it, I want to give a specific example so that you can actually see exactly how it works. So in this situation, here are some end users working on their production systems. We'll install the MForScale solution, which is a hybrid solution. So here there's an on-premise failover appliance, and that's installed locally. And that might be a virtual appliance or it might be a physical appliance. And then we have a cloud-based service, like would run on any public or private cloud. So here we capture the systems to the appliance. We dedupe them to compress the amount of data that's stored. And then we replicate those systems up to the cloud. So now we have 2 copies of those systems. We have one locally on the appliance, and then we have one centrally located on the cloud. So if one system were to go down, the administrator could fail over to the local appliance, just a couple of clicks, and bring back the most recent point or replica of that system. And that way, the users then continue working with that application or that server, right? But now let's simply assume a site-wide infection, a ransomware attack. So the local appliance is no longer available. But that's okay. We still use those same steps that I just mentioned. Here instead, we roll back to a clean environment. We fail over to the cloud. So we'll bring up a full virtual environment. It replicates exactly what was on premise. And now those users continue working by interacting with the cloud-based systems. So here you have a much faster recovery, a cloud-based recovery, of entire machines, and that way your users continue working while the production environment is repaired. And that's how the MForScale DRAS solution works. Now, coming back to something I mentioned a moment ago from what George said in the beginning of the presentation, that we can use the way that ransomware works against it. So what we're doing here at MForScale is taking backup a step further with anomaly detection technology. So this is a proactive ransomware warning system. Essentially what we're doing here and what we're looking at, this is within the MForScale dashboard. We're monitoring the backup activity within that dashboard, and we're looking at the patterns of data changing. We're taking a look at how frequently the data is being modified. So when that ransomware gets into a system, it starts modifying the files that it touches. And if it's a file you're backing up, then of course it'll be recognized as a changed file. So taking a look at the right-hand side here, in this analysis, we're monitoring the normal number of changed files per day. Now here, if we see a spike like this, an increase to a much larger number of files that have been changed, then an alert's going to be released. So this is how we proactively see the threat of data encryption by hackers before the ransom is ever posted or ever demanded. So that alert gets sent out to the admins, and then you're able to detect that issue before it hits. Obviously, you can then roll back to clean data environment much, much faster, far less data loss. You avoid paying those ransoms, and we call this anomaly detection technology. So here at MForScale, these are the two options essentially that we offer are cloud backup and disaster recovery. With cloud backup, it's a direct-to-cloud solution. It's oriented around data and bare metal image backup. Generally, typically speaking, for endpoint data protection, laptops, mobile devices, tablets, and it's optimized for small to medium businesses. Now on the right, you see MForScale Disaster Recovery. So this is the hybrid cloud solution that we just looked at in that animation, that example that I showed. So this does include that on-premise component we saw as well as the cloud. So of course you can back up data, but it goes further in capturing full system images and allowing you to boot and run those images either on a local appliance or in the cloud, depending on what you need. So a look at the specifics, just to cover a little bit more detail. Here's everything that we support. So we can protect any device. It can be desktops, laptops. We protect across Windows and Mac. We also protect mobile devices, iPhones, Androids. We also include some MDM functionality built in, like geolocate and remote wipe. And then we protect servers, both physical and virtual. We can support servers running Windows, Unix, Linux. We can support virtual servers on VMware, Hyper-V, or KVM. And we support more than 100 different operating systems. So really that's the broadest support footprint that you'll find in the industry today. As far as a few more specifics on recovery targets, we support any cloud or a prepackaged appliance as well. So you could use one of MForScale's 15 global data centers, or you could use your own private cloud if you have your own infrastructure. And then you can also use third-party clouds. So our software does run with Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, Windows Azure, IBM. And let's take a look at that process to see a little bit more about how it works. So from the bottom up, we're seeing MForScale Cloud Backup and MForScale Disaster Recovery are two solutions. And then that next layer up, we see the source system that we're trying to protect, whether it be Windows or Linux or Unix systems, VMware, Hyper-V, virtual machines, right? So in either case here, what we're looking at, we have an agent installed, a software agent on the machine, or in the case of virtual environments, with VMware, it would be a direct connection to their API, or in the case of, say, Hyper-V, it'd be a host level or hypervisor level agent. So we're going to capture those systems, and in the case of cloud backup, we dedupe the data. We directly send the data to the cloud of your choosing. And then in the case of DR, we capture those systems to an on-premise appliance, and then we deduplicate there, and we replicate that data to the cloud. So you have two copies of that data. And then everything here is administered through our central web-based dashboard. You can log into the dashboard from any browser, even if you're on a laptop, a tablet, or a smartphone. And in that dashboard, you can access everything here, even the orchestration policies that I mentioned a moment ago. So we're going to next take a look at those details. But that's a really critical point to mention is, you know, a disaster can never be planned for. So in most cases, of course, it's going to happen at 2 a.m. on a Saturday morning, right? So back when most of us were using outdated backup procedures, or maybe if we're using tape backup, when something like that happens, you know that arduous process of getting up out of bed, driving to the data centers, starting to recover from backups. But here, with that dashboard, if that same exact disaster were to happen, or if a ransomware attack were to happen, and you get a notification at, say, 2 a.m. on a Saturday, you can simply grab your tablet from the bedside table, a couple of clicks to reboot, and then you're done and you can go back to bed. So it's a much, much, much faster and much simpler process. Now, that orchestration process that I just mentioned, I wanted to show the details of that as well. This is one of the key differentiators in any DR solution. So how to deliver orchestration regardless of what provider you choose, you want to make sure to ask these questions, and you want to know how much customization and how much control you have in the orchestration process. So our latest release here included this visual designer that you see, and this is a drag and drop orchestration design surface. So within our dashboard, we have a boot tab. You can see here along the left you see a list of all the bootable machines. And then if you see here, you can simply drag and drop them over to your diagram design service, and then you rearrange in this surface here. So you can add wait times if you want to add delays between boots. You can create different boot groups if you want to run some machines that are more critical than others, and you separate them that way. And then within the LAN configuration, if you see that button there at the top, you can also specify network configuration settings for these machines. So you can then go and specify the subnet, gateway, DNS servers, DHCP range. You have all that customization available at your fingertips. You can enable or disable outbound internet access as well. So rather than taking a look at simply more details of the solution, I want to give a very, very specific example to you. Now, I'm calling this here a tale of two ransomware victims, right? Now, this happened in November last fall. These two businesses got infected with ransomware in the same week, and they experienced very, very different outcomes because of the underlying infrastructure and safeguards that they had in place. And these were two customers of one of our partners. So the first company was a retailer, and the second company was a manufacturer. Now, I'm not going to read through all this information here on this slide. You have access to these slides in the download, so you can definitely read through this. But with the retailer, they were only semi-operational within 2 to 3 days. They didn't have a proper DRES solution. Their email and their ERP systems were up and running within about 48 hours, but their non-critical, their apps and their file shares, they weren't restored fully for another 2 weeks or so. But if we look at the manufacturer, they were infected with ransomware the very next day, and the difference is that they were able to pinpoint the machine that had been infected. They were able to determine the extent of the infection and begin recovering clean versions of the infected files immediately. So they had the MForScale DRES solution in place, and they were able to restore the infected file servers, email, and ERP within 5 minutes total. And for those of you on the line here wondering about data security and privacy, a quick look at the encryption system. So we do take security very seriously, and your data is encrypted at 256-bit AES locally. It's sent over an SSL, and then it's encrypted again at 256-bit AES. And if you want to take it a step further, you can. With UltraSafe Max, you not only define the password, but you define the encryption key itself. So with this type of encryption system, and also with our data centers, we do comply with HIPAA, with SSAE 16, FINRA, SOC, CJIS, many other regulations as well. all of our data centers are Tier 3 and Tier 4 military grade. So if you are subject to any regulatory frameworks, again, regardless of which provider you choose, you do want to make sure that compliance factor is built in. So keep that in mind to ask those questions. Now, simply a little bit more about how MForScale works and about us as a company. We're essentially using intelligent software with built-in global deduplication, compression, and WAN acceleration technologies. So we eliminated the expensive hardware. You can bolt on an unlimited amount of cloud space for long-term storage. And we offer a low monthly subscription simply based on the number of terabytes that you protect. So you only pay for what you need to protect. And then about us as a company here, we were founded in 2011. We are currently active in over 170 countries, and we have 15 globally dispersed data centers all over the world. We were named the best ransomware solution in 2017. And you see that badge here in the top right. And then we'll also talk a little bit more about some of the Gartner awards as well in just a moment. But I did want to show you the actual recovery time for MForScale protected systems. And this is really interesting to take a look at. We call this our cloud boot histogram. And this is historical data for the actual recovery time of every system recovered by the MForScale disaster recovery solution. You can see along the bottom all of the dates here. So I just pulled this data from the middle of May to the beginning of June, so just last month here. And what we're looking at, we see these green and red bubbles. Just to kind of explain what this is, each of the green bubbles represents systems that are successfully recovered, and the red bubbles show systems not recovered. So if there's no bubble on that day, then there were no systems recovered that day. But we can take a look at the green and the red. So the size of the bubble is correspondent to the number of systems recovered. And if we look along the bubble's position along the y-axis, then we see the average time it took to recover the system. So if we're looking at the average time, this is in minutes here, and to let you know where this graph starts and ends, this is a 5-minute window. So if we're looking at the average time for all of these systems, it's simply a matter of seconds. And the maximum time here is 5 minutes across the y-axis. So what we're looking at here is essentially, I'm just showing this because we're putting our money where our mouth is, right? So we publish this live on our website. You could go there at any time. It's available to see at MForScale.com/cloudboot-histogram. And this is simply a live look at all of the recoveries that MForScale Disaster Recovery has performed. And if there are any questions about that, please do use the question tool here. We are going to get to the Q&A in just a second. So please do use that to get all of your questions in. So the last slide here that I wanted to share before we do get into that Q&A is what I mentioned about Gartner just a moment ago. So our approach is getting a lot of attention. Leading analyst firm Gartner, they named us a 2015 Cool Vendor in Business Continuity and Disaster Recovery. In 2016, they named us a Visionary in Disaster Recovery as a Service. And now in 2017, you can see that MForScale is in the leader quadrant. So we have been named a leader in DRAS, and you can see that we've been gaining that momentum year over year. And this is where we're at from Gartner now in 2017, and this was released just last week. So if anyone would like a copy of that Gartner Magic Quadrant report, I'm happy to send it out to you. You can just type your email address into the question tool, and I'll send that out to you today after the presentation. So with all of that information, I know it was a lot of info to take in just an hour, But I think we are going to dive into the Q&A now, so I will pass it back over to Rich.
Great. Well, thanks so much. This has been a terrific presentation. We do have some questions, and the first one is for George, and it's asking what can be done to train users to help prevent these ransomware attacks, especially I think where the end user may have gotten a social engineered email and not realize it and clicks on a link, and next thing you know the system's infected. So what do you think is best for training users?
Yeah, so I guess not having users isn't one of the available options to us, right, Rich?
Right.
So
not having any.
Yeah, that'd be the easiest thing. So I got to tell you, as a person that does this on a daily basis, I've seen emails where I've almost clicked on it. So, yes, the number one thing is try to train users to never click on it. The simplest thing is say never click on a link in an email. If somebody's sending you something, go to the website manually, Google it, whatever. Just don't go through email, because that tends to be the number one thing I see. The number two thing, and I keep coming back to that USB thumb drive study because, I find it very funny, but is it teach them not to stick stuff in their computer, right? I mean, stop it, right? And so I don't know if that means putting glue on all the ports or what, but, that's the other thing. I just think that the challenge is at some point they're going to slip up, right? And so you've got to be prepared for everything else, because, and I don't mean to pick on, well, I like to pick on users, but I don't mean to pick on them. I mean, like I said, anybody can fall for this stuff. This stuff is, the socially engineered stuff, like you had mentioned, is really good. I mean, it's not this horribly misspelled email anymore, right? So train them, tell them not to click on links in emails, tell them not to, insert found drives into their systems, but also be prepared for when that all fails.
Great. Before we move on to more questions, we have a poll that you can see here, and we'd like the audience to help us out with their answers to the poll that you see on the screen. And it asks, would you like to learn more about drafts? And the various responses are MForScale disaster recovery. Do you want to know more about MForScale cloud backup, MForScale disaster recovery and cloud backup? Let us know if you're not interested in either solution. So if you could help us out by responding to those poll questions, it would be great. And now we'll go back to our Q&As. One thing, we've got a couple of people are asking for the Gartner presentation, and I think, Carla, you'll be able to get that to them, to the attendees, correct?
Yes, I will. So, yep, I see lots of those questions coming through. Simply, please send me a copy of the Gartner report, or here's my email. I'd like more info, or I'd like the Gartner report. So I will definitely make note of that, and I will reach out to you after the presentation to share that with you.
And then getting back to another question for Carla is, some of the users are asking what your support is like, Carla.
Yep, that is a great question. So we do offer 24/7 support, and that's 365 days a year. It's U.S.-based support, so half of that team is in our Los Angeles headquarters and half is in Salt Lake City. And we offer support via email, via live chat, ticketing. We have a knowledge base online as well. And then we have a phone line with a 1-hour SLA.
Great. George, we have a question for you. Isn't all this concern over ransomware overrated? I guess that's kind of an opinion question, but what do you think? Are we overreacting here?
Well, I think it's a fair question because it's certainly risen up in the conversation from where it was, just a few months ago, right? So yeah, I think there's some, but I don't think overrated is really the right word. I think getting the attention it deserves is probably more accurate because it is different, right? This is not like any other disaster we've had before. Something I didn't mention before is we've seen ransomware where it does not start its process until late in the afternoon, right? So it specifically is waiting for a time when you change the most data. We've seen others where it will only change a little bit of data a day. And I mean, so these guys are getting really, really smart. You don't have like a hurricane doesn't think how to sneak up on you. You know it's coming, right? So it's just different. And so I don't think it's necessarily overrated. It's really just getting the attention it deserves.
Great. And now, Carla, here's another question for you. Is there a demo or an evaluation available that our listeners can get a hold of or see?
Yeah, we could give you a free evaluation, a 30-day trial there, or we could have you do a live demo with one of our senior sales engineers. Would be happy to set you up with that. So anyone who is on the line and, in addition to this, the person asking this one question, if anyone else on the line would like to take advantage of that as well, you can please just continue to use this question tool here. And again, just simply type in your email address or the best contact number for you, and I will reach out to you this afternoon after the presentation again and set that up for you. I will get you in touch with the right person for either a demo with a sales engineer or a free trial if you wanted to do that evaluation. Yep.
Great. And another question for you, Carla, is can you, meaning your system, replicate to multiple cloud services?
Yes, we can. So we do provide the ability to, you can use the MForScale cloud, which is you could use one of our 15 global data centers, or your own private cloud, or also any third-party cloud. So any public cloud like Windows Azure, IBM Bluemix, the Google Cloud, or Amazon Web Services.
Great. And I think this question is asking to go into a little more depth on your company history and funding and customers. Carla, can you help us out with that?
Yep, sure. We were founded in 2011, and our headquarters is in Los Angeles, California. We are a venture-backed company. We have about 150 employees worldwide, and we're providing failover solutions to protecting millions of endpoints and devices. In turn, about 20 billion data objects stored in our global grid worldwide.
Great. Well, we're coming up here on the top of the hour. I don't want to hold our audience over. This has been a terrific presentation. For those who have specific questions, you can, for Carla about MForScale, you can put your email addresses in the question box, and we'll get back to you. At this point, I want to thank both George and Carla for a terrific presentation, very interesting on a topic that's on everybody's mind. I want to thank the audience for being here with us. And to remind you again, the webcast was sponsored by MForScale and presented by Virtualization and Cloud Review. So with that, I want to thank everybody who's been part of this today and wish you a good end of the day.